Well, this one does. This is not stretching, it's spreading out.
I climb on it and Johnny on it every day.
When I was texting him something, I read something about old men and ladders just recently.
Saying something, saying something. We just.
Every day. Yes.
No, but it's real
No, 6, but you go off, I fell off on this step.
During the Roman period, much of the monumental architecture was expanded, rebuilt. Now, the golden age of Athens was long gone, but the city was still an important center of learning and philosophy. Even Plato's Academy and Aristotle's Lyceum were still in operation during the Roman period. This is the Athens that Paul visited in about 50 AD. As you'll recall, Paul was forced to flee a mob in Berea, and he was escorted here to Athens by some of the new Berean Christians. Paul was instructed to wait here in the city until Silas and Timothy could join him. According to chapter 17 of Acts, here's what happened next. While Paul was waiting in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Acts 17, 16 through 18. While waiting in Athens, Paul immediately noticed that the city was filled with idols, shrines, and altars and temples dedicated to pagan gods. According to Luke's account, this troubled him greatly. Altars in Greece were often dedicated to specific gods, such as Zeus, Athena, Apollo, or Poseidon. Altars here in Athens were even dedicated to the demons of the underworld. Walking around ancient Athens today, you still see shrines and temples and altars everywhere. These pagan places of worship were so common that virtually every block had an association with some god, goddess, spirit, or demon. A Roman official serving under Emperor Nero in the 1st century AD once said of Athens, "Truly our neighborhood is so well stocked with deities to hand, you will easier meet with a god than a man." Therefore, just as Luke described in Acts, Paul was truly experiencing a city, quote, full of idols. During his time in Athens, Paul taught and probably worked in the commercial section of the Agora, or marketplace, right below the Acropolis. Now, his time in the marketplace allowed Paul to come into contact with people from all walks of life. As you can see, the Agora from the Roman period, right next to the ancient Agora, has been remarkably preserved, including buildings, streets, statues, and altars. At some point, Paul caught the attention of the local philosophers and became an instant curiosity in the city. They asked Paul to come before the Council of the Areopagus and explain his new way of thinking. They said, "You were bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean." Acts 17:20. The Areopagus of Athens, also known as Mars Hill, is located just northwest of the Acropolis. Basically, it's a small mountain of marble where people met. During the classical period, it was used as an assembly place for judicial tribunals for major crimes. When Paul was in Athens, the Areopagus had become a popular gathering place for people to discuss and debate ideas. The Council of the Areopagus consisted of 100 members, including philosophers, scholars, and former officials of Athens. According to Acts chapter 17, it was here at the Areopagus that Paul engaged the professional thinkers of Athens. Paul very wisely acknowledged the broad spiritual curiosity of the Athenians, which provided a natural opening for a conversation about God. "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship, and this is what I am going to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands, as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. Acts 17:22 through 25.
All right. Good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing? Well, it is my next to the last time to get to teach everybody. I'll be in Africa 2 weeks from now, and then back for a little bit, and teach one more time, and then head to Ethiopia, and Shannon gets the pleasure of losing us while I'm in Ethiopia. So then I fly back from Ethiopia and just head to Chattanooga. It has gone by really, really, really quickly. I was looking up, and I've got a slide in 2-3 weeks when I teach again. I've been teaching continuously for like 11 years. There's like a couple of you in here who've been here really from the very, very beginning. So I created a couple of slides that has all the different topics that was done over that time frame. That we'll bring back some memories in a couple of weeks about all the things that we have covered in like a little bit over a decade. So we are going to get through Acts chapter 17 today. This is one of my favorite sections in Acts. I love this section. It's going to be a lot of fun, hopefully, as we go through this. Don't forget, we've got the podcast. I will continue participating in that after we get moved, and as Derek gets the next section of Acts going, and work through the rest of it next semester. We are, of course, in the middle of the Grecian Chronicle, trying to make sense of Paul's journey through Greece on his second missionary journey and all those places he hits up as he's writing these letters as well. Remember, all of this is dealing with real people. Okay, so we're going to meet the Stoics and Epicureans today, what these people stood for, why this is important in this real place of Athens, and the things that took place in Athens at the time, the real context of what's taken place. This is one of those sections in Acts where at the end, it's not a happy ending. For the most part, there's very few people who accept what Paul is saying. Did you ever notice there's no baptisms in this section that's mentioned expressly at all? There's like a couple of names and a few other people, and that's it. But there's a real plan that's taking place as this begins to unwrap itself. Just for your knowledge about map standpoint, Athens is there. Paul spends an incredibly short amount of time here. Scholars think that he's here for like 2 to 4 weeks while he's waiting for Silas and Timothy to catch up with him. Who's been to Athens before? Okay, we'll talk about some stuff here in a second. As we work through this, it's almost like we're getting these little snapshots of Paul. He's taking selfie pictures as he walks into Athens and he begins to see these things. Okay, he goes to the temple of the unknown God. He's not very happy when he sees this. And then he goes to the Agora and he's hanging out with the philosophers, making friends in the marketplace, sharing this good news in the marketplace. And then because of what he's saying and how intellectually stimulating it is and how different it is, he's asked to go to the Areopagus to help people understand exactly what he's talking about. This is to me, this perfect section of Scripture, how to engage in your culture. Okay, we're going to see that as this plays out in his sermon and how very different structurally it is from all these sermons that we've seen so far that Paul has delivered. The things that he references, the things that he does, the places where he starts is very different from anything else we've seen. And it really shows us how we need to structure how we reach people in using our culture and our society to do so. All right, those of you who've been to Athens before, you've seen some of this stuff. Our family got to go 2 years ago. That's our kids on top of Mars Hill. So it's just a big slab of granite that, as that intro video talked about, 100 people would typically meet up there, sort of the wisest, most intellectual men of the period would meet up there to discuss as a somewhat of a criminal tribunal when it was needed, but also just to hear ideas and exchange ideas and hear news and things of that nature as well. It's a pretty fascinating place to see. Mars Hill, you've heard it called that before. That's because it's related to Ares, the Areopagus. Okay, so the Greek name Ares, Mars, Apis, the hill of Mars. This is that whole Agora area. So if you've been there before and you've seen this stuff, you will remember walking through this area and still seeing all these altars and these idols to these false gods. Okay, these little g gods that we've been talking about in that Deuteronomy 32 worldview, all over the place in that area. And this is where Paul would have gone to engage these people. You can see the Acropolis right there at the base of the Agora as well. That's the Acropolis. That's another temple. I think it's a temple to Aphrodite. So these things still exist. These places are still there when you're roaming around in these areas. I mean, we read this on top of Mars Hill with the kids when we were there. It really brings your Bible to life when you get this experience. You get to see this stuff. But all these gods, these idols, these statues, these representations of these little g gods are still all over the place too. So you can go to the museum, see these things. I was in Turkey a few years ago as well. Anybody ever seen the altar to the nameless God or the unknown God? Have you ever been in a museum to see this before? This is the only place I've seen this before, was in the Istanbul Archaeological Museum, which there's some fascinating stuff in there. But there they are. That's what the temple to the unknown, or the idol, the altar to the unknown God or nameless God actually looks like. We'll talk about the story of how that came to be too in just a little bit as well. It's a fascinating story. Again, that Paul uses the cultural context of Athens to bring to life the story of the gospel and the good news. So let's work through this. Read it as always. We'll start with you and do a slide, a person, as we work through it, and then stop, try to digest it, and then work through this in a little bit more detail.
While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, his spirit was greatly upset because he saw the city was full of idols. So he was addressing the Jew and the God-fearing Gentiles in the synagogue and in the marketplace every day, those who happened to be there.
Also, some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers were conversing with him, and some were asking, what does this foolish babbler have to say? Others said, he seems to be a proclaimer of foreign gods. They said this because he was proclaiming the good news about Jesus and the resurrection.
So they took Paul and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, may we know what this new teaching is that you are proclaiming. For you are bringing some surprising things to our ears, so we want to know what they mean. All the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there used to spend their time in nothing else than telling or listening to something new.
So Paul stood before the Areopagus and said, men of Athens, I see that you are very religious in all aspects. For as I went around and observed closely your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. Therefore, what you worship without knowing it, this I proclaim to you.
The
And
guy
God,
who made the world.
No, it's okay.
Got one more.
and God who made the world and everything in it, who is the Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by human hands, nor is he served by human hands, as if he needed anything, because he himself gives life and breath and everything to everyone.
For one man he made every nation of the human race to inhabit the entire earth, determining their set times and the fixed limits of the places where they would live, so that they would search for God and perhaps grope around for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us.
For in him we live and move and about and exist, as even some of your own poets have said, quote, for we too are his offspring. So since we are God's offspring, we should not think the deity is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human skill and imagination.
Therefore, although God has overlooked such times of ignorance, he now commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has set a day on which he is going to judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he designated, having provided proof to everyone by raising him from the dead.
Now when they heard about the resurrection from the dead, some began to scoff, but others said, "We will hear you again about this." So Paul left the Areopagus, but some people joined him and believed. Among them were Dionysius, who was a member of the Areopagus, a woman named Damaris, and others with them.
No? So what'd you notice in this?
What did you notice?
What do I notice?
It's my turn.
You know, we talk quite a lot about in the woman law and judgment, and now our emphasis is grace, but Paul doesn't lead with grace at all. He says God has set a time to judge worldly righteousness. And that's where he started.
Yeah. If you remember, we're tying all this to the Old Testament. Very much an Old Testament theme. A judge is coming. You know, that time is still ahead of us. You know, we're all going to be judged. What else you notice?
I've always liked that phrase that he's not far from any of us.
Ooh, yeah. Yeah. Very powerful. That's cool. What else?
You know, he contrasted their gods with the God, and he says he doesn't live in temples, and he doesn't need to be served. So their whole culture was about appeasing their own gods, who were capricious, and you never knew how they want to respond to you, and there was all this uncertainty, and they needed to go through these acts of worship to appease their gods.
Yeah. Now, one of the fascinating things here, so the general culture of Athens, yes, appeasing the gods, but the Stoics and the Epicureans that he's dealing with here, essentially the atheists of the day. They're not tied to these superstitions and these gods. In fact, one of the reasons they're upset with Paul is because he's coming in, bringing new gods in. Like, we've been working for years trying to stamp these old gods out. What are you doing bringing new gods in? So that's a little bit of the cultural story and gist that's going on too. He's meeting with the Hutchins of the day, the Stephen Hawkings of the day, the really smart atheists.
That's also why they laugh at him when he brings up resurrection of the dead.
Yeah, and there's a little bit more there with the resurrection too that's fascinating. We talk about this.
Yeah, but it also speaks to the fact that whatever influence the Jews had, the God-fearers had in that community, didn't seem to be too broad, because they said, oh, this sounds completely strange to us.
Yeah. What else you notice?
So maybe why he didn't spend a lot of time there, kind of brushed off his feet, said, I'm getting out of Dodge, because this is not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Not to get somebody behind it.
Yeah, and a very powerful, I think, way we should do mission work today, maybe. If you go into an area and you can't get traction pretty quickly, you need to move on.
Maybe that Demetrius guy turned into the C.S. Lewis of their time.
Yeah. So Damaris was a woman, Dionysius is the man. And Dionysius, according to early church historian Polites, I think he became the first bishop of Athens, the leader of the church in Athens. So there was at least a historical antecedent to what happened to him, that he did become a very powerful figure in the church based in that area in Athens. So yes, seed was planted. Yes, it grew strongly in that area. Yeah.
Even though those idols are still there, do people there offer worship to them? Do they believe in them?
I think because we did have a Greek guide that we spent like a week with, like a very, very, very small portion. I mean, it's typically the Greek Orthodox Church that's in that area, and we're more familiar with like Roman Catholicism. It's the eastern side of that, and so people are nominally Greek Orthodox. But it's powerful sort of historical lesson too. None of those guys. I mean, you can go see their shrines and their figures and things like that, but they didn't last. the seeds of Christianity took root, and yes, there were issues that followed with it as traditions of man crept in, but it did take over. What else you notice or think through with this?
You know, for us, evangelism was usually, let's talk to somebody who goes to another church, maybe, or somebody who has some kind of God knowledge background. And today, you can't take that for granted. And Paul started with some of the fundamental questions that even atheists ask themselves.
Yep.
And started there and answered some of those.
Yeah. Develop that further, because think of how different his lesson is from anything we've seen so far in Acts. Where does he, everything else that we've seen recorded so far, where is he doing it? First place. And then where is he starting with? Yeah, and he's opening the Hebrew scriptures and like, you saw it. I mean, you think about when he was and he basically gives a whole synopsis of the Old Testament story and throws this at like very much like Stephen's speech. And he didn't do that at all here. I mean, he starts with their literature. This is fascinating. He starts at the very beginning, this concept of who God is. What you would start with an atheist is those arguments for the existence of God. Or if you're talking to a Muslim, you're starting in a different place as well. So Paul's showing us how to do this in a cultural context. Anything else you notice as we
This
sort of...
is probably more than we want to know, but we talked about it anyway. When we hear the word backward, our minds go back to Talladega, unintelligible language, but that's not what they meant. A literal translation was a seed picker that represented some bird, or they would go around just picking up little scraps, kind of like you see a seagull in a tourist area. And they were basically saying, this guy's just picking up scraps. He's one of these guys who picks up scraps of knowledge, but never comes to any deep conclusions.
Yeah.
And so they were just, it was really a term of derision other than language.
Yeah, very important. We'll talk about that in a little bit more in just a second, because that's a very powerful point of what's going on here. All right, let's work through some of this. Remember, he leaves here after Berea. Most likely, he took a boat to get there and sort of hug the shore, as we talked about a while ago. This would have been like a 4-week journey. Some of the Bereans went with him to escort him to Athens and make sure he's safe. Silas and Timothy stay behind there in Berea, and the plan is that let's meet up, okay? And then let's head off to Corinth. Athens, this is one of those free city-states, okay? And they've got this immense history. You think about your world history, who's all associated with ancient Greece. Think about some of the cool stuff that has happened. There's been great movies about this before. What do you remember about ancient Greek history? Who's the first person that comes to mind?
Socrates.
Okay, Socrates. So yeah, you got your great philosophers, Socrates, Aristotle. I'm thinking like world empires and stuff like that. Come on, guys. High school history. John, you know.
I would guess and embarrass myself.
Alexander the Great.
That would have been right.
Yeah. So, I mean, think about Alexander the Great. I mean, they've got this immense history of, we conquered the world, we crushed the Persians. Y'all remember the 300 movie from several years ago, with all the different Greek city-states. Athens was known for this place of thought, okay, with the history of Socrates and Aristotle, Plato, and the foundations of democracy started there as well. I mean, we get a lot of our way government is done based on what they did in Athens. Work was also derided, manual labor type work. If you were anybody of importance, you didn't do manual labor. They had a lot of idle time to worship the idols and all the things associated with that, as well as to explore all these different thoughts and thinking that's taking place. So Paul arrives at what would have been the Piraeus harbor, which you can still go through today. He would have walked through this double gate into Athens, and then he immediately would have been hit with all these idols. Now, this is not new to Paul. Okay, we've seen Paul travel in all these Greek areas before. He would have grown up in a culture where idols were present. Okay, but this is unique. I mean, he's going into this place where this ancient proverb that the guy who did the video talked about, that there are more gods than men in Athens. So if you've got a city of about 25,000 people, you've got 30,000 gods. Okay, and if you notice, if you paid attention to that introductory video, he talks specifically about, you would see all these idols to the Greek and Roman pantheon, but you would also see idols to these Egyptian gods, these other gods throughout the Mediterranean area, and you heard him say demons. Okay. Worship of demons occurred in Athens as well. So Paul goes in and he gets caught by this altar to the unknown God. Okay, you saw an example of that in the Istanbul Archaeological Museum. This triggers some thoughts. I am in a place where the little g gods have control. This is spiritual warfare that's taking place. And specifically when he sees this, this is something I can use to begin to reach these people using their cultural context, what's in their literature and what's in their history. Paul's a very smart guy. He's a very well-read guy too. And we're going to see him quote from some of their sources as well that they would have certainly known. Also, what we're going to see take place, and it's very subtle background stuff, okay? This is why it's important to understand your Old Testament. There's a lot of references to this Deuteronomy 32 worldview in Paul's speech here, and then what's actually playing out in Athens, okay? Notice that verse, when the Most High what? Most High God. That means there's little g gods. Okay, you got to have a Most High one. There's other ones that exist. When he gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided up humankind, Paul's going to allude to this, okay, in his speech when he set up the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the heavenly assembly of little g gods. The Lord's allotment is his people. Jacob is his special possession. If you go on a little bit in Deuteronomy 32, talks about what happens to the children of Israel, but what happened to all the peoples. They made him jealous with other little g gods. They enraged him with abhorrent idols. They sacrificed to demons, second place in Athens, not God, to gods they had not known, to new gods who had recently come along, gods your ancestors had not known about. So Paul's in this place where this stuff's taking place. Okay? He's got to have an evangelistic strategy. So he goes to the marketplace. It's a lesson for us too. What are we doing in the marketplace? Are we looking for cultural cues, cultural context? Are we throwing the seed out there where we can engage in these conversations with people and help them try to understand the gospel story? So he specifically encounters these groups of Stoics and Epicureans. Okay, I was a philosophy major in college. I love talking about the Stoics and Epicureans. Stoicism has actually made a pretty big comeback today. It's been watered down a good bit, but if you read any Ryan Holiday books, The Obstacle is the Way. It's a really good one, by the way. Modern Stoicism has become very prominent amongst the tech culture out in California and stuff like that. Does anybody know anything that I'm talking about? Read any Ryan Holiday books? All right. Hey, what is your general understanding of what the Stoics believe? What they did?
They suppress their emotions and feelings and.
Yeah, to some degree. Yeah, that's sort of what we think. My grandmother was very much a Stoic. It's not quite. I mean, it's the modern sort of interpretation that suppressed your emotions and feelings. Marcus Aurelius, one of the great Roman emperors, in his meditations, he was a Stoic, and that was his thought processes, is how he dealt with stuff as an emperor and how he went through things. Also a really good read. But one, did I hear somebody say something?
I was going to say they would seem to be very deliberate with their thought and how that
much sort of, I can't avoid tragedies, I can't avoid pain in my life, and I'm going to face it. Okay, in sort of the Ryan Holiday book, The Obstacle is the Way, there are obstacles in my life, and I'm going to have to face them. And I'm going to have a strategy for how I do this. So superstitions and gods, little g gods, they derided those. The gods have no power. Okay, it's just me against the fates. And I'm going to be dealing with this stuff in life, and I'm going to have to figure out a strategy to deal with it. Okay? So all of these philosophies that came along in ancient Greece were really sort of twist on what God had brought to the Jewish people a couple of thousand years earlier, was what's our strategy for life? How are we going to deal with things when things don't go our way? And of course, in Judaism and Christianity, it's what? How do we deal with things when things don't go our way? Where's our grounding?
Prayer.
Prayer. What else? Faith. What else?
Great physician.
Yes. Keep going. We've got a philosophical worldview. We've got a strategy that comes in place from the revelation of the Holy Scriptures on where we're going to go when life is tough. They're having to come up with this and make this up as they go along. For the Epicureans, and Epicureans get a really bad rap in modern understanding of Epicureanism, but what's your typical understanding of Epicurean beliefs? There's a whole sort of subset of Epicureanism that is where the misunderstanding comes.
Just enjoy life.
Yeah, so the hedonistic worldview, just, hey, party all the time, do whatever I want to do, nobody has any control of me, so that's like the far extreme of Epicureanism. The concept, the general concept of Epicureanism is a pursuit of pleasure, but it's also an absence of pain. Okay, so if you're doing something that causes you pain in the long run, that's not a good thing. Okay, so the ethical underpinnings are a little more prominent than just sort of the way we typically understand it, the hedonistic worldview. Both of them also had a very different understanding of what happens when we die. Okay, the Epicurius had this, believe it or not, atoms were talked about a lot in ancient Greece philosophy, very different from the atoms we understand today. But basically you die, and the atoms in your body and in your spirit go off into the void, and you become no more. Okay? Whereas the Stoics actually had this belief that you would sort of live on in some way after death. Okay? Different understanding. Paul's pitting them against each other as he begins this discussion in the marketplace. Here's what Johnny was talking about earlier, that word spermologos, which is translated for us as babbler, that literal scavenger of ideas that Johnny was talking about, that little bird going to pick up the seeds. And in fact, what they're seeing here is Paul is creating his own gods. Okay? He's been scavenging these little seeds from all these other different philosophies, okay, religions, and Paul's bringing these new gods into Athens that nobody's ever talked about before. And there's similarities to these other gods. But remember, both groups, they don't want to have anything to do with those old gods. They've got a whole new philosophy of how to deal with life when life comes at us. And they want that to win out. And so they want to stop Paul in his tracks and what he's saying from making sense. That's why they challenge him. All right, specifically, what they understand Paul to be doing is talking about two gods. Jesus in the Greek, and Anastasis. Okay? Jesus is a masculine name. Anastasis, from where you get the name Anastasia, which is a feminine name, means resurrection. So as he's talking in the marketplace, and maybe people are just catching bits and pieces of what Paul is saying, they hear him talking about a male god and a female god that maybe are married to each other. which fits in to the Roman Greek pantheon. But they're not familiar with this Jesus and Anastasis names. They want to understand this a little bit better. Okay? So culturally, linguistically, that's what seems to be taking place. And why they ask him to come to the Areopagus, because we've never heard of this Jesus and Anastasis. Come explain this to us. And so Paul has to go to the Areopagus. And if you notice at the end of his speech there, he talks more about what resurrection actually is. And clarifies that he's not talking about a female God. He's talking about coming back from the dead. All right, so he goes before the Areopagus because they have misunderstood what he's talking about. This is not a trial. They're interested in this intellectual novelty that he's brought into them, these possibly two gods that he's now talking about. And this allows him to enter into a more formal debate. So Paul's been roaming around Athens, and he's seen this altar to the unknown God. He knows the backstory. It's a fascinating little backstory. Epimenides, who Paul is actually going to reference when he quotes some philosophers here in just a second. Epimenides was this Cretan philosopher. Crete is an isle off the coast of Greece. Centuries earlier, like 600, 700 years ago before this took place, there had been a massive famine in Athens. Okay? And of course, when there's a famine, back in the old days, or plagues or stuff like that, you would begin to do things to appease the gods. Okay? You would make sacrifices. You would pray. You would do all this stuff. So they had done this to all the different deities that were worshipped in Athens at the time, and nothing was working. So they reached out to Epimenides, said, hey, come help us figure this out. And Epimenides was like, well, you prayed to this god, you prayed to this god, you prayed to these 100 other gods. Well, we must have missed one. So we're going to do this. We're going to take all the sheep, black sheep and white sheep. We're not going to let the sheep eat for a bit. And then we're going to set them out on the Areopagus hill. And whichever ones, without eating, sit down immediately, that's where we're going to place an altar to the unknown God, and we're going to make a sacrifice there, and this is going to fix the problem. And it actually did. Okay, so they built these altars to the unknown God, sacrificed there, and then the plague dissipated. And thus they said, well, we missed one of these gods. That's why these altars to the unknown gods are in Athens and around sort of that Mediterranean area, because you didn't want to miss one out of your pantheon of gods. So this was the backstory. This is what every Athenian knew had taken place about 600, 700 years ago. And Paul's weaving this into their...
To the unknown God, whom you worship without knowing, him I proclaim to you.
The AI has gotten really advanced. I didn't even make it do that. It just did that when I plugged in, like, to do the thing, and then I played the sound. Because usually I take the sound out. I was like, oh my goodness, it got the sound right and the quote right, too. So really super cool. So that's what he starts his speech with. He's like, I got this historical context. Everybody's going to get this if I make this reference. I've seen this as I've been wandering around in Athens. I'm going to tell him who this unknown God is. And he starts in there, does that. Notice he specifically, that Deuteronomy 32 worldview, something every Greek person would have understood too because of Alexander the Great. Because they were a people who had set these boundaries before by what they had done and pushed the boundaries, and the boundaries have been pushed back on them. So ancient people, ancient historical context who had been involved in doing this. But he's referencing that Deuteronomy 32 worldview that the times and the boundaries had been set. And it was that unknown God that they don't recognize who's done that. Okay, so he's echoing these Old Testament themes. He's referencing Daniel too, showing that old Daniel chapter 11 that we went in, spent us like 3 weeks going through a year or so ago, that God is sovereign over history. He's controlling all of this unknown God that they don't recognize. So he's tailoring this message specifically to the Greek mindset. Okay? It's all this stuff that they would have gotten and understood through their history, their cultural context, And he's taking that and helping them understand the gospel. Did anybody notice a couple of words that are really sort of cool and unique? It's around the section you mentioned, Judy. A couple words in there.
Like groping.
Groping and,
Mine said seeking, but I think yours had something different. I don't know what it was.
yeah, seeking, or what do other people have in their translations? We got groping, seeking. I had searching in mind. Anybody have anything different? A couple verbs there that are just like really unique to Scripture. I mean, it's really powerful stuff. And in ancient Greek language, there's something called an optative mood. Eric, do we have anything called like an optative mood in English?
I don't know.
Okay, we're not supposed to. I hardly speak English intelligibly myself, so I've got to rely on Derek to help me with all this stuff. But there's something in the ancient Greek called the optative mood, and it's used here. Okay, Paul's using this here, and it actually expresses a wish or a very hopeful attitude. Okay, because there was a time period when this wasn't available to the Gentiles. Okay? Yeah, you could do it, but it was sort of difficult, and God hadn't really extended his hand to the Gentiles yet. And so, this is one of only 70 times. Think of how many verbs, how many thousands of verbs are in your New Testament. And 2 of them, in the optative mood, shows up here. Okay, so Paul's being very specific in saying this door is open for you now. And I hope you take this opportunity and walk through it. That you're groping for him and that you're searching for this unknown God. That's pretty cool to me, linguistically, with what's taking place. So that language that's used there, no longer is it a religion that you're excluded from. This is for all the nations now. It's exactly what was promised in the Old Testament. Okay, Isaiah 42 being one of those verses, that there's a light to the Gentiles that are coming out, and I'm here to begin to shine that light for you. I want you to recognize that this orchestration behind history, these boundary limits that are being set, these times that are being set, are all under control of this unknown God that I'm here to tell you about. So he quotes some Greek poets. Aratus and Epimenides are the 2 poets that he quotes from. Okay, hundreds of years ago, these guys wrote this stuff. Okay, Paul's obviously very well educated, very well read. Okay, not only in the religious literature that he would have been exposed to at the feet of Gamaliel, but he's read the New York Times bestseller list of the day. Okay, he's read all these guys and understood them and weaves them in to bridge these philosophical thinkers to meet them where they're at, using their thoughts to communicate true theology. Okay, we've seen this happen in the biblical writers too. They draw from the literature of their time. We see Jude drawing from the book of Enoch. We've seen stuff from Menander, some of the Egyptian wisdom texts that you might not know that's there, but they do this a lot. Okay, it's just like me referencing Star Wars. Right, Mark? All right. Whenever I can work in a Star Wars reference, I always like to do that. Okay, because you understand, or half of you do, the cultural references I'm making when we weave in something from our culture that we sort of expect everybody to have knowledge of. And Paul's doing the same thing by quoting these Greek poets. He's like, you know this stuff. I'm going to use this as a bridge to communicate with you in language that you understand, in the cultural context that you understand, absolute truth, which we can find in lots of different resources. Yeah.
Think about him using people they would have heard about to relate to him. But he doesn't even reference Jesus until verse 31.
Yeah.
And it's not specific, he didn't specifically say his name, as far as I can tell. I kept reading, but he doesn't mention the name specifically. Do you think that was intentional? Like the adverse of this is, I don't want to mention this person we have our hope in was a carpenter from Nazareth who died with 2 criminals. Like, would that have lessened his argument to them, do you think? Or do you think he's just trying to build up to it? Or
I think it's probably a little bit of both. One, it probably would have lessened his argument a little bit. 2, those Old Testament references as prophecies, they wouldn't have understood. They don't mean anything to us. So he's having to build up to it. It seems like he sort of gets cut off at the end. Like once he's talking about a man coming back from the dead, and they get that this Anastasis is not a female consort, a female god, and they're like, he's literally talking about him. This is ridiculous. It almost seems like they just sort of cut him off at the end, which is fascinating too, to think about how this is playing out in real time as he's going through this. But his message is obviously just very well scripted for the specific audience that he's with. High level educational, high level philosophical and theological underpinnings to pit the Epicureans and Stoics against each other, really, and their philosophical theological underpinnings, weaving in your cultural references and hooks to get everybody, and then leaving them at the end with, it's a man. And he's done this because you can do it too, if you believe. And then they choose not to.
The idea of bodily resurrection was Hebrew.
Yes.
It wasn't, it was nowhere else in culture.
Correct.
And they might have believed in the afterlife.
Correct.
But not when they said resurrection. It was always, from a Hebrew mind, it was always bodily.
Correct. And remember, the Epicureans are like, your atoms just dissipate and you go into nothingness. The Stoics are like, there is some kind of afterlife. But it's definitely not a resurrection. Yeah. So we talked about this, that he calls them to repent at the end. He's challenging their beliefs. He shifts to this message of urgency. He's using the ebb and flow of empires, this familiar theology to them, to bring this message and adapt to this message, to engage in their different worldviews. All right? Jackson's very different from what it was 20 years ago when we moved here. There's a lot of different worldviews in Jackson now. Okay, you've got to learn how to work in these different worldviews, how to go into the marketplace and engage with people. That's the message, I think, of Acts chapter 17 in this story here. I want to spend a little bit of time here as we start to wrap this up. He leaves, actually the next one, he leaves an emphasis on that there is going to be a judgment, there is going to be a resurrection. He clarifies who that, or what that Anastasis is. Actually, I guess this is the next slide, so we'll get to it in just a second. You only have 2 people named here that follow what Paul says. Notice there's no baptism mentioned anywhere in this Acts chapter 17 passage. I mean, we're so used to that being the end result of when Paul goes in somewhere. And for some reason, that's absent here. Let's talk about this. It's times of ignorance. Somebody read that verse that mentions that there. Can't remember what it is exactly. Here's sort of the end of this all.
That first one,
Yeah.
God overlooked ignorance, errors, well,
No, the actual Bible verse. I'm sorry, Crystal. Somebody got it there.
In the past, God overlooks such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent.
Judy, what does that mean? That means Gentiles got a free pass back before Paul gave this lesson in Acts chapter 7.
I'd say that's kind of the grace part. I could be wrong, but he's kind of like, okay, y'all just gonna do what you're gonna do, like in Judges. There's some thought in about everybody just did what was right in their mind, but there was no central, like God's central presence leading them, like there is to the Israelites a lot of times.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think even and I think Jesus brings that to us today. So kind of, I don't know.
This is tough.
Yeah.
Yeah, he definitely hits us in Deuteronomy 32 worldview again. Other nations cast off to the other little g gods, focusing on Israel. But now that time's gone. Everybody knows. But your great times 100 grandfather who lived prior to Acts chapter 17 and the resurrection of Christ, did they get a free pass?
He says, it's funny, when he's in Lystra, he's also talking to pagan people who thought he was a god, you know? He says, in past generations, he allowed all the nations to walk in their own ways, yet he did not leave himself without witness, for he did good by giving the rain from heaven.
Ooh, very good. Very good. Because there was always a way a Gentile could attach themselves to the God of Israel. We even see these God-fearers, that phrase that's used for Gentiles who accept the God of Israel and come into the synagogue and worship and participate. But what was going on? Why does Paul say this? What does this times of ignorance mean?
I think about the verse in Hebrews where he says, once for all. And it's the idea that it goes for us as we continue on, but also looking in the past.
Yeah.
And I don't know how he's going to do that.
Yeah,
But he does.
Yeah, is there some type of past leniency that people before the cross had?
Maybe leniency just refers to Jesus, because he hadn't come here yet. But does he not speak in another verse about man kind of knows what's right and knows to do that or not?
You have no excuse from the natural revelation.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's tough stuff. Stuff your kids ask you and you're like, you're struggling through it. I see a bunch of smiles up there. Y'all dealt with that before like I have. That's a tough thing to deal with. What happens? What's the leniency thing? How's that meted out? How's God's grace work in situations where people haven't known or hadn't had a chance to know? But obviously, that's what he's talking about here. These times of ignorance have ended. I'm here to tell you about this unknown God, and now you're responsible.
The other thing, Scott, that we don't really understand is that God's judgment is perfect.
Yeah.
And we don't understand what perfect judgment is.
Exactly.
So he weighs everybody a little differently.
Yep.
There appears to be, if you look at 30 and 31, a hinge, and that hinge is the word cause. And that's a times of ignorance God overlooked. And 31 says, because he has fixed today.
Yeah.
So there's something about fixing the day of judgment ends this overlooking whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah, so that again, Old Testament stuff, that day of the Lord, when judgment comes, that he's dealt with in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, the whole day of the Lord imagery that's there, it's very much Old Testament themes he's alluding to right here. Day of the Lord, judgment is coming. Okay? That day has been fixed. God knows that day. Even the Son of Man, Matthew 24:25, does not know that day or hour. The Father does. All right. So as we wrap this up, Paul leaves disappointed, I think. Or maybe he's like, knew this is the way it was going to roll. Sometimes you throw the seed out and you're like, do the best I can. Maybe something will stick. And he does that. Again, remember he's there for like 2 to 4 weeks. And he leaves to meet up with Silas and Timothy in Corinth, where he's going to spend a really long time. 18 months or so he spends in Corinth. It becomes a very important place with some really long letters Derek and Greg are going to get to work through over the next couple of weeks while I'm in Africa. This is going to be 2 of those letters in one of these places that's really going to shape our faith. Okay, those are really long letters. A lot of stuff taking place in Corinth. Okay, they've got some misunderstandings about things, and Paul's going to have to communicate with them because he spent so much time with them